Hey guys, welcome back to the final chapter of Learn Python the Hard Way. In this final chapter, we are actually going to develop our own web game, combining some of the concepts that we learned about previously. So here we're going to use the game we already created in one of the previous exercises, and we're going to combine that with our Flask application, which we have been building over the last couple of exercises. And in the end, we're going to have a web application that is able to run our game. And we're going to learn a lot more about different concepts, such as working with different sessions and also how to refactor code. Now, this exercise can be quite huge because there are a lot of different concepts that are being covered. But to keep that manageable, we will only take a look at kind of the high-level concepts, how things are working out. And then, of course, we can invest a lot more time if we want to go into a lot more detail and, for example, style our application properly and build on top of it. But to get started, let's take a look at where we're starting from. So in one of the previous exercises, actually in exercise 43, we started by creating a text-based adventure game where we could navigate between different rooms and then go from one room to the next one. And if we find the right path, then ultimately we win the game, and if we make a mistake, then of course we will lose the game. So we are going to use that and going to mix it with exercise 47, where we also added automated tests. And then we're going to combine that with our Gothon web application, which we're going to use to basically make that accessible through the browser. So effectively what we're doing is we're going to refactor the exercise 43 game that we built, and then we are going to expand on that. So refactoring basically means that we make some change to our code without actually changing the functionality. So we just change the structure itself and improve it, of course, without actually making any functional changes. We can of course also call it just fixing stuff. And when we code, we actually do that quite often just to improve our overall code structure that we're working with. Now the idea here is that we take exercise 47 and we copy it over, and we are using it as kind of a map of the rooms that we are navigating with. Since map is actually a keyword inside of Python, we are going to call this not map, but planisphere, which is an old word for a map. So to get started with it, we can first of all just take a look at exercise 47, at the game structure we have here, and we want to copy that over into our Gothon web Flask application so that we basically make our game accessible on the browser. So let's just take a quick look at that. And if we just take a look at our project structure, we can see we have exercise 47 here. Then we have Gothon web, which is our Flask application, which we've been working on in the previous couple of exercises, and we really want to combine the two. Of course, we need to make sure that we activate our virtual environment in order for this to work properly. So before we get into that, let's just take a quick look actually at our project structure here. I'm going to open Visual Studio Code, the text editor, or the code editor I've been using. And if we take a look at the project structure here, we can see exercise 47. And just as a reminder, we have here that separate folder exercise 47, and in there we have our game.py file. This is basically the room class that we defined with three different methods: our init method, then a go method, which allows us to navigate along some path, and then the option to add a new path in here as well. So this is what we're going to use as the basis for our web game, and we're going to copy that over, as well as the tests that we have written previously. So if we take a look at our exercise 47 tests, we have those three tests in here, and we're going to copy those over as well. Let's take a quick look at Gothon web, and just as a reminder, in here we added a couple of different templates that we've been using as part of our Flask application. We of course also have a test folder which already includes one test here, testing our app.py file. And right now we can start out by copying over our game.py to Gosthorn Web, and we'll do the same for our tests Python file here. So let's do that right now. We are inside the projects directory, and so what we can do is we can start out by copying from exercise 47 our game.py file. We want to copy that into Gosthorn Web. And we're going to call it, let's just double check, we should call it planisphere.py. Alright, let's confirm that and let's quickly double check. It should now be inside of Gosthorn Web. And here we have our planisphere.py file, which of course includes the same code that we have inside of exercise 47. And now we can basically repeat those same steps for the tests that we want to copy. So here we want to copy over our tests for our game. Let's just double check what it's called, exercise 47 tests. And we want to copy that over to Gosthorn Web tests. And these should be called planisphere tests.py. Of course, here we keep the naming convention that we basically make the name of the file we want to test, and we end it with underscore tests.py just to make sure that they properly match. So let's do that. That has been copied over as well and should now be available inside of planisphere underscore tests.py. So before we do anything else, let's just briefly check that this is still working properly. So let's navigate inside of the Gosthorn Web directory here and let's run nose tests. And if that works properly, then we should see that we ran a total of 3 tests inside of planisphere underscore tests.py and 1 additional test inside of app underscore test.py, so a total of 4 different tests. Now we're getting an error because actually I forgot one thing. We need to make sure that we actually update the name here, because of course we copied it over from exercise 47 and we are using the game.py module here. We want to change it, of course, because we are now inside the Gosthorn Web directory. So let's change that to gosthornweb.planisphere like this, and let's run our tests again. So that's one thing to keep in mind when we copy over any files, just to make sure that this works properly. And we see we run a total of 4 tests, again 3 tests in here and 1 additional test in app underscore tests.py. So these are our 4 tests that we have been running, and it still works properly, so we copied it over correctly. That's basically our starting point here, and from here we can now build on top of that. So if we take a look at the structure here, this is actually our starting code, so we can go ahead and we can expand our room class. So as of right now, inside of planisphere.py, we basically have our room class itself, but then of course we need the individual rooms that we are working with. So for instance, we have the central corridor here with the room name and a short description, which is then displayed once we enter that room. And we have the same for the other rooms as well. So ideally we would type this out, and this would however take quite a while. So I'm just gonna copy it over for now. And then we want to update our planisphere.py file to include that code here. And then later on, if we wanted to, of course, we can fully customize that. We can add additional rooms. We can add different paths that we want to use, and we can fully customize the name of the rooms and of course also the description for the various rooms that we want to create. So let's just update that here, copy it over. So that is our updated planisphere.py file. And just let's take a very quick overview here. So we have the various rooms: central corridor, laser weapon armory, and so on and so forth, which are the various rooms. And then we have the different paths here. So the paths always are associated with a specific room. So for example, the bridge here is one of the rooms, and then these are the options that we can take when we're inside the room. So we can throw in the bomb here, for example, or we can slowly place the bomb, and based on which option we take, we then basically switch over to a separate room. So for example, generic death is our room that basically shows us that we have died. While if we select the right option here, for example, escape pod, we would then switch over to a separate room, for example, in this case, escape pod. And this is how we navigate through the various rooms that we have. And of course, we have the start constant here. So our central corridor is our starting point. We have a method to load our room, and the name of the room can also be displayed. So this is our Planisphere file. And let's take a look at what else we got. We have here our tests as well. So just to make sure that our tests also work properly, if we just double check our Planisphere tests, at the moment we have 3 different tests in here. We can just add an additional test just to see that the additional test also works properly. You'll see that the other code is actually identical to what we had before. But just for completeness sake, we can copy the entire code here and basically insert that into Planisphere tests. Let's save that real quick. Okay, and now we updated both our tests and also our Planisphere file that we have. All right, let's just quickly double check that this is still working properly. Let's run our tests here. And now, since we added an additional test case, a 5th test case, this should actually work. Seems to be a small error. Let's just double check. Okay, and the error was that I just accidentally copied over some of the code here, or the text outside of our actual code file. That of course is not so great, but we just remove that. Let's run those tests again and see if that fixed the issue. And here we see indeed we ran now 5 tests. That works properly, and our tests are still working correctly. So we have our Planisphere file in place, we have our Planisphere tests in place, and of course ideally we would now go ahead, we would update the name of the various rooms here. We can create our own rooms, and as we do that, we can of course also add additional unit tests here, so we continuously test our code as we add additional features to our game basically. And ideally we would also update our generic death objects here, so that we have different kinds of dying basically, and that we can basically have different kind of deaths depending on which options we choose. But that's really just the content of the game, not the core functionality. So I'm gonna skip that for now, but ideally we would update that. However, more important is that we have our game engine, and that we are also able to put it on the web, because so far we have basically only copied over the game itself, so we can execute it, for example, from the browser. We need to make some changes in order to actually run it within our Flask application. So in order to do that, we are going to update our app.py file, which we created in some of the previous exercises when we started working with Flask. And for now I'm just going to copy over that file here, and then we're going to go through it in a little bit more detail just to take a closer look at it. So just on a high level, we basically define the different routes we're going to use, and what we want to do is we want to navigate inside of our app.py file, inside of our Ghost Web directory. Let's save that for now. And if you take a closer look at that, we can see that we define different routes. So here we define our /route. So if we go to our URL that we are using, then we are automatically at the root level basically. And here we define an index function which defines a session for the current room that we are in, and then we redirect this to our game route. The game route is basically where everything's happening, so we're going to take a close look at that soon, but whenever we go to our root route here, we will be forwarded to the game route. And here is basically where everything's taking place. So we are using our session to get the current room name that we are in, storing that in this variable here. And then if we are actually accessing that page using a GET request, so if we are loading it, then if we have a valid room name, we are going to use our Planisphere file from before, and specifically we are going to call the load room method down here, and this allows us to load basically a new room that we store in the room here, and then we will create a separate show room HTML file that allows us to basically render that room and display it. And if for whatever reason we don't have a valid room name, then instead we are going to render a second template, which is a uDied HTML template, which will always be displayed when we actually died. And of course later on we can create additional HTML templates which can show different endings, for instance. And if instead of using the GET method here, so instead of basically accessing our web page, we send a POST request by sending, for example, a certain input to navigate to a different room, and then we end up in this else branch here. We basically get whatever we enter into our form, which we'll see in a second, and then we basically load the specific room. We can navigate to the next room, taking that, using that go method that's associated with our room class inside of Planisphere. So basically up here. And we can navigate that, we can use that to navigate through the different rooms. So that's basically how we use that. We have a secret key here that we are going to use. We should ideally change that, especially if you want to put it out on the internet, not just on our local environment. So if we want to deploy our application later on, we should definitely change that secret key here. But as we saw, we need basically two additional template files, so our showroom HTML and our uDied HTML for this to work properly. So let's take a closer look at that. But before we do that, we should actually enter this command here to export our Python path variable here, and we need to execute that. So let's do that real quick. All right, and now let's actually add the two different template files that we need. So we can actually delete some of the forms that we created previously, or the files, the templates that we created previously. The hello form HTML and the index HTML we can remove. So let's do that real quick. So if we go into templates, we can see we still have our hello form HTML and we have our index HTML. So let's remove them real quick. And then we mainly have the layout HTML, and if you did the exercise of some of the additional exercise in one of the previous chapters, you may also have an upload HTML to upload some attachment files. We don't really need that in this exercise, but I'm going to leave it in here. And now we can go ahead and create two additional template files. The first one is going to be the show room HTML. Of course, we can do that from inside of our terminal here, or alternatively, we can do that directly from our code editor. So if we go in here and we go to templates, I'm just going to create it from here. So we want to create a new file called show room.html. Let's create that. And let's open it real quick. And here, just to get a quick overview of that, we of course extend the layout HTML to the basic structure that we created in our layout file. And then we are going to add in here in an h1 heading the room name, the room description, which is of course the description we have defined in our planisphere.py file, which we can customize. And then we have an if-else statement. So if we actually have in either the death room here, or if we made it all the way to the end, then we will display the play again link here, which goes back to the root folder, which, if you think back, of course redirects us to /game. Else, if we are in any other room, then we are going to go to perform the game action here with a post request. And we have an input field here. So using this form, we will actually be able to basically provide some input and then to navigate from one room to the next. And we'll take a closer look at that in a second, but let's for right now type this in. So this is our showroom HTML. And then we also have, of course, our died screen. So if we didn't make it through the different rooms, then instead we die, of course. So let's go ahead to templates. Let's create a new file here. And again, instead of creating that from our coach directory, we could of course go ahead inside of templates and, for example, use touch. So let's just take a look at, it's called u_died, u_died.html. So this is another way of creating that, and then we can actually see it show up here, or we could of course go ahead and then type the name of the code editor we're using. So for example, code in this case, or if you're using something else like Vim, for example, we'll type in Vim, or charm, for example, for PyCharm, followed by the name, so udied.html, and this way we can also open it in our code editor. So here we go, udied.html, and this is actually extremely simple. So we just have a heading here, udied, a short message, and then we have a link here to, again, the root folder to play the game again. So now we have those created, and with those in place, we should actually be able to run our game in the browser already. So we can, of course, run our tests just one more time. Let's go back to the root directory here and run those tests just really briefly. And after that, we are going to update that. So we are getting this error here when we run app_test.py because we did not update the tests yet. And we can see that this is still the test code for the old application. For instance, there we didn't have a root route. Instead, we were getting a 404. Now, of course, with our current app, we are basically setting it up in a way that if we go to the root route, we actually define it up here so it exists. So in that case, for example, we should get back status code 200 instead of 404. And then we had two additional routes here that are checking for, here, for example, the hello route and for some data that we're entering. So the data here at the bottom, just remove that because that's not relevant. And then here, instead of checking for hello, we can actually check for game, the game route here. And then we should also get back status code 200. And for now, just going to remove this line here. Of course, we could check additional tests to check, for example, for the post command that we can add inside of the game route. But now this should actually work. So let's run the tests again and let's see if that fixes the issue here. So we run those tests one more time, and now we get back that our tests run correctly. So we updated that, and then finally we want to run our app.py to actually test out the game, and that should already be working with just some relatively small changes. So let's run Python app.py. This is going to start our development server here on the port that we configured. So let's go ahead and actually open that. And you can see we are directly forwarded to game. So this is exactly what we defined in our app.py. If we go to the root route here, so to slash, can press that and we are forwarded to our game. And now we can see that this is the central corridor, which is basically the starting point of our game. So if we take another look at planisphere.py, if we go down here a little bit, you basically see this is the central corridor, our starting point. And now if we take a look at central corridor, this now displays our room with the associated description, which we can see here. And of course, thanks to our show room HTML file, we can see the room description here. And we also see the form that is being displayed, because we are currently not in death or the end. So instead we see our form here that we can submit. And let's take a look at which kind of actions we can take. If we go down here a little bit, we have our central corridor with those various paths. So if we just enter shoot, for example, with an exclamation mark, we are going to die. So let's try that real quick. So if we enter that and we submit, we see death. So our generic death view is displayed, which of course is our you died HTML file. And here, using that link, we can go back to the root, which again forwards us to the game page. But let's see how we can properly navigate through our rooms. So let's take a look at Planisphere again. We are in the central corridor. Both shoot and dodge would actually kill us. So let's enter tell a joke, which should forward us using our path here to our laser weapon armory. So let's tell a joke, submit. And now we're inside the laser weapon armory. And you can see how using just a little bit of code actually, and not really making such huge changes to our app.py, we are now able to navigate through the various rooms. And in the future, we would not really need to update our app.py. If we want to add new rooms, we could simply update our planisphere.py files. So we have more of a modular design that we can work with. And now inside of our laser weapon armory, we can enter star or asterisk here for generic death, or we can enter this code here for going forward to the bridge. So it's 0132. Let's type that in. So now we should be navigating to the bridge, which we have here. And then if we type slowly place the bomb, then we have our escape pod and we basically made it out of there. So slowly place bomb, submit. Let's take a look now. So we should be forwarded to the escape pod here. And there's one more step that we need to take in just a second. So here, if we type 2, then we will be at the end as a winner. So let's do that. Submit. And now we're at the end and we basically won the game here. And of course we could add additional rooms to it, add additional paths, and then navigate through those various steps, and we can go back and play the game again. So that's basically the structure that we created here, and this is how we can quite easily turn the game that we created previously into a web application, building on top of what we used before in what we learned about Flask, using our app.py file here. And importantly is here we are using sessions to accomplish that, so we pass the room name to it, and that allows us to really navigate between those different rooms here. You can see the URL actually never changes, it stays at game the entire time. So this is how we can use that and how we can create our web game. And now of course we could make our game more complex and add a lot of different options to it. So here are actually some suggestions. So we can fix all the bugs in our code, make it more user-friendly. We can improve our automated tests as we add, for example, new rooms. We can add more unit tests. We can style our HTML to make it look better. So one thing we did here is actually to change the background color, but of course we can do a lot more. We can, for example, display the different options that the user has to type that in. We can create a separate login screen and authentication mechanism, help system. So there are just a lot of different things that we could add to make our game more complex and to build on top of that. So that can be a great exercise. We can spend a lot of time on that just to expand on these different options and to add that step by step. And once we have done that and we really understood the mechanics of this web-based game, we really have a nice little project that we worked on, and we can cover a lot of web application programming, how to work with Flask, how to use sessions, authentications, and all these kind of steps that we can include. So there are some common student questions. So for instance, I'm using sessions in my game and I can't test it with NoseTest. And there is a separate entry here in the Flask testing documentation that can address that. So we can create fake sessions inside of our tests to cover that. If you get an import error, then that could have several reasons. So for example, if you have the wrong directory, wrong Python version, if the Python path is not set, which we did before, or if we forgot our init.py file, or of course there could be any kind of spelling mistake that is causing that error. So good luck with the final exam. Feel free to make any adjustments to that application, to really customize it. I think that's a great way to learn a lot more about Python and to get really into that. So thanks so much for your time, guys, and see you in the next video.